Do not be afraid of the ego. It does depend on your mind, and as you made it, by believing in it, so you can dispel it by withdrawing belief from it. Do not project the responsibility for your belief in it onto anyone else, or you will preserve the belief. When you are willing to accept sole responsibility for the ego's existence yourself, you will have laid aside all anger and all attack, because they come from the attempt to project the responsibility for your own errors. But having accepted the errors as yours, do not keep them. Give them over quickly to the Holy Spirit to be undone completely, so that all their effects will vanish from your mind and from the sonship as a whole. He will teach you to perceive beyond belief, because truth is beyond belief, and his perception is true. Let's recap what we've learned from the last couple of videos. Your peace of mind is a prerequisite for seeing a peaceful world, because the world you see is nothing but a projection of your inner realm. If the weather inside is stormy, the world outside looks stormy. Your mood determines your outlook. The reason it looks stormy all the time out there is simply that we have forgotten our true nature, which is invulnerable innocence and holiness. This is the truth that transcends belief. It doesn't need you to believe it to be true. It just is. And it's good news. So what do you think Jesus says about the Last Judgment? Is it hell and brimstone, as the Catholic Church insists? That was the ego's first judgment, and every judgment of the ego since has been aligned with that belief. Because the ego believes so intensely in our collective guilt, it causes us to be afraid of salvation. When someone presents the idea of salvation, that we could all be innocent, we run in the other direction, which is quite literally running further into the fire. The ego is deeply confused about reality. To the ego, our collective innocence is the most blasphemous idea out there. I'm not even going out on a limb when I suggest there's a part of you that knows this already. God intervened exactly once in this world, and it was the instant we had the tiny mad idea of separation. He corrected for the thought by implanting the Holy Spirit in every one of us. The Holy Spirit is the part of our mind that does remember the truth. When I say in a therapy session that happiness is sourced from within, which I often do, no one as of yet has told me I'm crazy, because it's a simple truth that we all know deep within ourselves. Instead of taking comfort in this, the ego jumps up and protests vehemently, looking suspiciously for ulterior motives in the person who's presenting the truth, because by its nature, the ego will always be suspicious of other people's intentions. It is premised on the idea that separation is real, and it keeps projecting images of fear and destruction out in front of us and then pointing at them as incontrovertible evidence that we are guilty. The ego hopes we won't notice that it manufactured the evidence itself. So the Last Judgment is actually synonymous with the Atonement. And in case you've forgotten what atonement really means, it's the awareness that we are one mind, at one-ment. This is the same as accepting that we did not accomplish the separation. We tried, but it was impossible because it was not God's will. It doesn't adhere to the laws of nature. So your peace of mind relies on accepting the truth about yourself, or the atonement. Quote, "Unless you do so, you are free to crucify yourself as often as you choose." End quote. And you are also free to stop crucifying yourself anytime you're ready. Let me try and put the guilt and blame hot potato game in the form of a simple equation. Grant me the premise that we are all one mind in reality. Accept that is true just for a moment for the sake of seeing the logic of this argument. It is now impossible to project guilt onto someone without accepting myself as guilty. If you accept the ego's premise, this has to be true. So therefore, it is an all or nothing scenario. We're either all guilty or we're all innocent. Now start watching your thoughts and begin to notice how they seem to gravitate towards seeing guilt in everyone. And consider the possibility that this is the only real problem you have, and that it's an illusionary problem. Quote, "There is no point in trying to avoid this one decision. It must be made. Faith and belief can fall to either side. But reason tells you that misery lies only on one side and joy upon the other. Forsake not now each other, for you who are the same will not decide alone or differently. Either you give each other life or death, Either you are each other's savior or his judge, offering him sanctuary or condemnation. This course will be believed entirely or not at all, for it is wholly true or wholly false, and cannot but partially believed, and you will either escape from misery entirely or not at all." End quote. So essentially, the Last Judgment is the correct judgment. The Last Judgment is synonymous with the Atonement, and it began when Jesus was resurrected and agreed to oversee the project. One supposedly separate mind at a time, the jury is changing our verdict to innocent because one at a time they have come to remember the separation never actually took place. It wasn't accomplished. Quote, "The Last Judgment is generally thought of as a procedure undertaken by God. Actually, it will be undertaken solely by the sonship with my help. It is a final healing rather than a meting out of punishment, however much you may think punishment is deserved. Punishment as a concept is in total opposition to right-mindedness. The aim of the final judgment is to restore right-mindedness to you." End quote. The Last Judgment is also the realization that we, as our little separate selves, are not in a position to judge anything correctly. We have too small a window to look out upon reality. Our sensory organs go everywhere our bodies go, and they don't extend beyond our bodies, meaning the amount of information that we know through seeing and hearing things is infinitesimally small when compared to what we don't know. We don't get to see or hear everything that the other 8 billion or so people see and hear. So the Last Judgment is the laying aside of our belief that we can judge anything correctly from our limited sensory perspective. For every time we make what we see real to us, we are making an assumption, and it's based on very incomplete evidence. We would need to have a bird's eye view of the battlefield of life to see it completely, and we're not in a position to see the complete truth. As one who is sitting in that position, Jesus is trying to assure us, and we're running in fear from his comforting words, further into the fire. In his earthly existence, Jesus spoke in parables. The stories of teachers like him were kind of like the movies or the cinema of the day, and they were called parables. A teacher would come to a new town, word would get around that a metaphorical story will be told today in the town square, and partially just for entertainment's sake, people gathered around. Today, he often speaks through us, through the movies that we produce. Think of The Matrix or Groundhog's Day or The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind as examples. The parable of the prodigal son actually covers everything I've said today. I urge you to Google it if necessary and read it for yourself. In fact, I'll put a link in the More section. This is not a new radical story. It's a very old radical story, and I'm saying it isn't that radical since it's been around for 2,000 years now. As the world we see with our sensory perception is becoming increasingly chaotic to the degree that we sometimes question whether it's really real, now, more than ever, we might want to take another look at both the science and the spiritual teachings and reconsider some of our most basic assumptions. Our salvation doesn't rest on us doing this. Our salvation is guaranteed. The only difference, really, is that we will not prolong the illusion of suffering a moment more than is necessary. As long as you believe in what your physical sight tells you, all your corrective behavior will be misdirected. Thanks.